Hey everyone, welcome to the Wild Chronicles podcast, where every episode we look at what God's doing locally and globally to find ourselves in greater awe of who He is. Here we are, guys. It's the second half of 2025, the first church tour video of July, and I am here today to talk about none other than the United Unitarian Universalist Church of Waukesha. All right, so guys, let's just dive right in. So this is definitely a church that is outside of my comfort zone. So let me give a little context to why I have it on the list here. First of all, I've talked about this in a lot of the previous church tour videos before, but obviously the whole inspiration for the entire Celebrate Church tour was last year in October when the city of Waukesha did this event called Waukesha Unlocked, and they had 9 different churches put their name in this parish passport thing. And I visited last October, that weekend, 9 different churches. I went and saw what they were like, and a lot of those churches I've actually already been to on this church tour. In the first half of this year, I went to Southminster Presbyterian, I went to St. Matthias, and a couple other ones. But Waukesha City Church, I believe, is on there too. But this one was another one of those churches that I visited that day. Living Word Lutheran was another good one too. Lots of good ones that were involved in that. But anyways, though, so this is one of those 9 churches. And this is the one that day, and even today, that I was the most uncertain about, right? Because the Unitarian Universalist Church is probably, I would say, out of all the churches I have on my list of 60 churches that I'm going to try to visit, probably the one I would least consider to be a church. And I'll explain a little bit more about that soon. But essentially, the Unitarian Universalist Church, it's not really as focused on God as it is on people, I would say. I would say that's probably the biggest thing that is different about the Unitarian Universalist Church. It really is high emphasis on unity of people, with God kind of as this, we don't know what God is, so we're just going to focus on what we do know, which is we know people. And I think this is the Celebrate Church tour, right? Because I could criticize things, but I think the good thing about being people oriented is that you're focused on what's right in front of you, right? And there's a lot of churches that are very God focused, but they miss the people in the church. And I think that there's balance in that. I think that the biggest struggle of this church, which I will just be upfront about right off the bat, is that there is not a clear concept of what God is, or a clear, everyone in the congregation is encouraged to have their own beliefs about God, instead of versus other denominations where it's we all believe God is such and such, and we can get unified around this core belief of God that we all agree on. Versus the thing that they try to have everybody agree on in a Unitarian Universalist Church is not we all believe the same thing about God, but we all believe the same thing about people, that people deserve love, that people deserve respect. So it's a very different kind of church. But that being said, let me talk you guys through my experience. I had some good things that I did enjoy today. I personally will not probably go back to this one, just because I think for me, church really exists to have us find our relationship with God. And I believe there's only one God, the Father Almighty, and then Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, right? And I think that those things are super essential truths that are important to fellowship around. But I would say that this place, if you don't look at it as a church, and you look at it more as just a place for people to come together, to love one another, and to share different beliefs but still care for each other, I think that's something that this Unitarian Universalist Church did really well. So let me walk in. So I walked into the church today. Their service is at 10:30 a.m. if you ever want to come. And I came at 10:15 or something. I came a little early. And when I got there, I walked in the door and I got my name tag. They have these name tags for you that you can fill out. They do have the little pronoun thing, so they're very LGBTQ affirming, which, again, I'm not super big on that, but I know that some people that's really meaningful for them, and so they have you like share your pronouns and stuff. But otherwise, you walk into the church and you get your opportunity to, or so when I walked in, this guy was at the door. I think his name was John, and he was telling me a little bit about the church, and he explained it this way, which I thought was a really good explanation, where he said the Unitarian Universalist Church is different from other churches because most churches, when you walk in, they will have the idea that we have the answer, we have the truth, we have the one way that you can get to heaven, or we have the one reality about God that we're going to preach to you. And they said that the difference in the Unitarian Universalist Church is that there is no one truth that we preach in this church, but instead of being a church of answers, we're a church of questions. And I even like wrote in my book, like, I think this is a very agnostic environment. It's not really like, and they use the word theistic, and the guy at the door, John, was saying, like, I'm not theistic. A lot of our members aren't theistic. To be a theist means to believe in God. And so a lot of the members of this church don't even believe in God. Or they have doubts about God, or they have like half beliefs in God. And that's what an agnostic is, right? An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe in God, but an agnostic is somebody that believes there's something out there, but will not really know all the details of it, right? And I think that is like, in some ways, I think it's healthy to have some level of agnosticism, in that like there are some things we can be certain of if we really know Jesus and we like have that deep faith. But I think, like, I wrote in my notes here that this place is a very humble environment because it comes in with the perspective of like, none of us really know it all. Like, we have questions. Every Sunday we have more questions than we have answers. And I think that really, when you're walking with God, the God of the universe that is so big and complex and layered that like no human can fully comprehend him, like, we should have questions, right? Like, that's what keeps us in awe and wonder of God, is knowing that we'll never fully understand him. And I think like why I do like other churches that are more answer focused is because I do believe there are some absolute answers about God and his character and things like that we can know for certain and we can trust for certain. But at the same time, there are also a lot of things about him that we will never know. And I think that this church really leans into that we don't know everything about God side of the conversation. And it's interesting. It's interesting to see that focus be different. So they're a church of questions and not of answers. A very agnostic environment, but humble and very kind. Like, all the people that I met today were very kind, and they like that made me feel welcomed, and like, you know, they wanted to make me feel at home. So I sat in the back of the room and was talking to John in the back, and I had some good talks with him. He actually told me he's a teacher in Milwaukee, at a school where 98% of the kids at the school are, they're like people of color, or people that have very, very low income, and they get 98%, like out of that 98%, like 80% of them end up going to college, like even though they come from these low income homes and stuff like that. So he has a very high heart, and this is a very big focus of the Unitarian Church, is like they have this big heart for like people, and so they want to help marginalized groups or people that are looked down upon, like find purpose and find that they belong and find a way to make it in life. And so while God isn't really their focus, they have like a strong emphasis on humanistic ways of impacting people, right? And helping people that like feel like they don't belong, like women, or like another thing that John was telling me about was that like one of the things that originally drew him to this church, what like he said he grew up in a Baptist environment, but then he ended up here and now not really even believing in God, but instead he says that the Unitarian Church, like, he says he likes it because it was on the right side of history over time. Like they were one of the first churches to be anti-slavery, to be pro-human rights. They were one of the first churches to have a woman pastor, and they're always been like supportive of gay rights and things like that. Now, I don't agree with like gay rights and all that stuff, but I think that I think that's why people are drawn to this church, is because like they were very pro-human in a lot of areas where other churches, you know, stand more by the more traditional view of what God says about the world, or what God says about, human rights and things like that. And so anyways, but he was very pro this church because of those reasons. And yeah, this church does really look to those groups that have been set apart or like not treated with love. Because even if like those things are wrong, which I'm not going to say like I have a strong stance on all of them, but like, things like having slaves or women pastors or LGBTQ and all that stuff, like no matter what your stance is on those things, like all those people still deserve to be loved, like LGBTQ people and slaves and women, like they all deserve love, even if like, you can have all your different stances on what levels of authority and what levels of, influence all of those different people should have. But we can all agree that Jesus and his love is at the center of the gospel. So anyways, the other thing about Unitarian Universalism is they have this symbol where there's a cross off to the side, but it's a circle. And what that symbol represents is that this Unitarian Universalist idea was birthed from Christianity. Like Christianity was like the origin point for this idea, but now it extends beyond that, right? And so now it becomes a place where people are all invited to come, like Buddhists or Muslims or Jews or atheists or agnostics. Like it's meant to be a place where people can come and realize that the roots of this idea of church is from Christianity, but then like instead just kind of be this homogenous place where people can come and learn about all kinds of different beliefs and try to pull the positives out of all of them. Which is like, I think it is valuable to like listen to other beliefs and to look for God in them. But I do, like, I obviously stand by the Christian stance that like Jesus is the only way. And so like, it's a muddy line they walk where Jesus is kind of like off to the side, but I like that they at least like acknowledge that, Jesus is where this idea started of like, let's be more understanding of one another. Because I think that's what Jesus' heart is. Like he wants to understand people where they're at. But it's also then like to lead them to him, as opposed to just like, I'm just going to understand you where you're at and let you sit in a false like reality, So it's tricky. But anyways, that being said, so they were saying like next week they're actually meeting with another Unitarian Universalist church in Brookfield. So throughout the summer, apparently all the Unitarian Universalist churches in the area will like meet at different Unitarian Universalist churches. I will say this was like, as far as like demographics and like size, there was probably maybe like 40-ish people in the room. I want to say like 40 or 50, trending older, but like I would say mostly in like the 60 to 80 range of people. But then you had like some like more middle-aged people, and like you had one or two kids. So it was a varied group of ages that we had here. Not really young, but for the most part, definitely trended older as a congregation, and medium small, I would say. So that being said, so the way they start their service is they do this thing called the chalice lighting, where they light this chalice and they kind of just like recite this statement about religious freedom, encouraging people to have religious freedom and remember the Christian roots of Unitarianism. So again, like I like that they remember Christianity as the root of this idea. And then like, and really like, if we think about it, God does encourage his people to have freedom, right? Like he gave Adam and Eve the freedom to sin. Or like, I think about the story of the prodigal son. Like the prodigal son has the freedom to go and explore what the world has to offer before coming back to Jesus at the end. And so I think that is a biblical idea, that God does want his people to have freedom to explore religions, to explore other lifestyles, but then they also have the freedom to return back to him, and he will accept them with open arms after they realize all that stuff is not going to cut it, So I think that it's not my favorite statement, but I think it makes sense. It makes sense that they encourage the religious freedom at the beginning of their services. So anyways, after that, they sang a song about how like if everyone wanted freedom and peace, there would be no more war, which again like just shows this ideology that they have is like, if all people could just like have this idea of we want to encourage the peace and the freedom of people, then like it wouldn't matter what gods we believe in or like what religions we have, because we would just put peace and freedom first. And again, like that sounds really good, but I think like everybody's ideas of peace and freedom are different, and so then it just gets very muddy. Like obviously it sounds really good, but it's muddy. Anyways, after that though, they moved to this time of joy and sorrow, where they had people like have a freedom to come to the front of the room and share like anything they're joyful about or anything they're sorrowful about, just like to, announce that to the congregation and share that with them, which I think that's cool that they give their congregation a chance to speak out and to share their joys and their sorrows and to share in those things together. I think that's a really biblical principle, is like for us to share our joys and sorrows and like to suffer together and to rejoice together with fellow believers. The only thing about this is like in this case, everybody here isn't a believer. Like, I mean, like what people believe in here is like they believe in the unity of people, but like we're not all believers in God, so it's messy. But it's still good to share in joy and sorrows with people, even if they're not Christians. But the strength really comes from doing it with Christians. So yeah, so it's interesting. Like it's weird. Like some of the joys that people shared is they got up there and they were like, I'm joyful about something about my cat. And I was like, okay, good for you and your cat. I guess I don't know anything about your cat, but it was interesting. So anyways, then we move along and they had this time for all ages, they call it, where they read this book called Oliver, Octopus, and the Unwinnable Game. And it was basically about this octopus and this other sea animal. And basically the sea animal was like playing a game with a bunch of blind fish. And he was saying like, I'm so good at this game, I always win. And they're like, well, yeah, you win because the other people are blind. Like, what if we played a game where you had a disadvantage? And so then they played a game where like the octopus was like, here, let's see if you can juggle. And like the stingray couldn't juggle, but the octopus could obviously juggle because he has 8 hands. And then the stingray is like, that's not fair because you have 8 hands. And he's like, yeah, well, now you know how it feels to be like the blind fish when you're playing a game where you have to not be blind. And so then eventually they end the book by like playing like pin the tail on the whale or something, where like everybody has a blindfold on. So like even the people that can see normally, like they're also blind in that case. So it's like more equal. And so like the whole point of that kid's story they were sharing was basically this idea that like equality doesn't necessarily mean you're all doing the same thing, or equality can be like, everybody does the same thing. But equity means, they were talking about like equity versus equality, and how equity means like, to make an equitable experience for people, you like look at more than just like having everyone do the same thing, but like people that have a bigger need, you give them an even playing field or a chance to succeed. So like if somebody has a natural disability, you give them a little extra help, is essentially the idea. And I think the metaphor behind that kind of goes like to marginalized people groups, right? Where it's like in our society, like people of color or LGBTQ people or women, like all these like groups that are considered marginalized historically, all of them, sometimes like the government will have this thing where they want to give them extra help. And, in this storyline, they're kind of like giving that picture of like, of like the octopus versus like, these people that, like the stingray, or like the blind fish versus like the fish that could always see. Like obviously the one that could always see had it easier. And I even think about it like in terms of money too, like not even like in terms of any of those people groups. Like if you started your life with a bunch of money, like obviously you're going to have an easier path in life than like somebody who like started in the dark alleyways in the slums, and like the idea behind this like story was like, okay, like the way that humanity should be helping is like the government should be giving not the people who already have it easy more help, but help the people that, are in the alleyways, like to get the help. So again, very people oriented message. So we move on from that. And then like the main message for today was about this lady named Reverend Florence Buck, who was like a woman minister that like became a Universalist minister. She ministered in Kenosha. She liked water and bird watching and science and nature. She had like these different beliefs. Like, to be honest, none of it really resonated with me because, again, like, there's no message about God. Like, this entire in this entire service, there was no real message about God. It was just about this lady and like what she used to preach about. Like, she apparently used to preach about like you have to know, you have to be, and you have to do. And like I've even seen in Christian churches that similar idea of like you have to know God, you have to be who God has made you to be, and then you have to do things like as He calls you to do them. So like those are good principles, but they didn't have like any real scripture to back it up or anything. So then I did like one statement they said about her, though, that she had this idea of like getting people to be religious to develop attitudes and not to develop a repetition of creeds. So that's like something that is encouraged in the Universalist Church, is this idea of like we're not going to focus on so much just like getting all the people of the church to recite the same creeds and say the same words, but like to get them to develop heart postures and attitudes that reflect God instead of just, you know, going through the religious statements. And I think that's good. I think that's something that we can take away, is this idea of, you know, we can grow so much more when we let God affect our heart posture instead of just like, you know, we just go through the Christian motions, you know, that some churches will do. So I think that's cool. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, there's like a few other things. Like they said about her that she said that Jesus was prophetic. Obviously, that's huge that they were like affirming Jesus's propheticness. I don't know if they affirm that he's God, which is less great, but they do affirm that Jesus was a prophetic voice. And she also said that helping young people is important because they paved the way for the next generation, which I agree with. So yeah, some things I agree with there. Other things I didn't agree with as much. And so, but they had that message. It was more like an educational presentation, like a slideshow about this woman. And it was interesting because like afterwards, John, the guy that I was sitting next to, like he told me that like every week at a Universalist church can be completely different, right? Like he said one time he took his friend to one and like the whole message ended up being about interpretive dance because the speaker they had that week like was just like showing them how like they can encounter God through dance, I guess. So like everything can be different. You get the most educational things, you can get like the most like abstract creative things. Like on the walls of the Universalist church they have like all these quilts that were sewn by people, so they're artistic, like, and they have like the way of experiencing God through that. But the art on the quilts was like, you know, some of it was like your third eye kind of stuff, some of it was like, you know, more like plant oriented and nature and Buddhist-y. So like there's a lot of stuff that can happen in these churches. I think like the struggle with it is like they want to have unity, but they don't have a united view of God, right? And so it's hard to have unity when you don't have the same united belief system. So that's, I think, like the hardest thing about it. But I think like, again, like their main thing that they try to unite around is this idea of like loving people even when we believe different things. And I think that is really like the heart of this entire church tour. Because even like with other churches where I think like they all generally agree about God and Jesus, like, and it makes it easier to unite around those things. Like there's still differences, right? And in those churches, like you can see Catholics and Lutherans, like for example, that are like so set in their ways that they won't even love somebody like that. Versus like in this church, the one thing they do really well is they love people even when you believe completely different things. Like in that room there were Christians, in that room there were Buddhist oriented people, atheists, like, but yet there was still like community and community. And I think that is a good thing, because that's something that we should be able to do. We should be able to have community with people who believe differently than us. Yeah. So I think that's what I would celebrate about this church is the community of people that believe differently. And I don't think I would celebrate it as a church, but I would celebrate it as a place if you want to learn about people who are different than you. because I think that is what this church does well. And they also do like try to make a difference for humanity as well. So that's kind of where I would land on that. Anyways, after the service, so they ended the service with this girl playing piano and singing a song. I didn't really talk much about the music here, but yeah, they did have like some songs. They like put music on it. They put the lyrics on a projector, and they were all pretty more traditional type songs, I would say. But it was funny because John, the guy sitting next to me, told me that he actually like thought it was funny because like there's this thing in the Universalist Church where people say like, oh, Universalist singers are bad, but it's because like, you know, a lot of the time the reason they don't sing super loud is because they're trying to decide if they agree with what's being sung, like as it's being sung. And that's the thing. That's another difficult thing about this church, right? Is like, you know, like everybody in the church believes something different. So like the songs that are being sung, like, you know, you can't really sing them out loud and proud and unified like you can in another church because because everybody doesn't believe the same things. So it's very difficult that way. To have like a unified chorus of people in a Universalist church all singing passionately that they all agree on something. So I thought that was funny that he was like, yeah, like in the Universalist church, they say we're bad singers because, you know, we're like deciding if we believe it as we try to sing it. Like, so that was funny. But then after that, one thing the church did do well is fellowship. And so I went downstairs, got some good food. Probably one of the best food displays we had there. There was chocolate chip cookies, bananas. They had some Chex Mix. They had some, you know, cheese and crackers and lots of good stuff. Apple juice. So really, really nice hospitality. And then I ended up talking to this guy. I believe his name is Aaron. Yeah, Aaron. Who was like doing some of the facilitating of the service. But he actually told me that he and his wife, I believe, had previously been like in the Christian circle, and that he had done like seminary and everything, and it was like doing seminary and missions type stuff for 7 years before he just recently ended up moving to this Universalist church like in the last year. And I asked him what he identifies as now, because like some of the people in this church I talked to, they were just like, yeah, I'm not a theist at all. I'm just like here for like the good of people and humanity. But like he was like, no, I would say right now I trend Christian agnostic is what he said. So like he went seminary and like he learned about God, but he also, and I think this is something like even myself, like I wouldn't call myself an agnostic, but I think having some degree of like agnosticism and some degree of like, there are things I don't know about God is healthy. And he was saying that, yeah, like over time he's gone to this place of being like still pretty Christian, like he would lean Christian, obviously, but still having this understanding that like there are a lot of things we will never know about God. Like we're never going to know it all. And I think that's a healthy stance to have. But yeah, so he said him and his wife, they recently moved to this church from a different church in Milwaukee called Brew City Church, which I feel like I've heard of Brew City Church before. Like I feel like I might know people that go there. I have to like look it up and see, but he said he used to be involved at that church and then recently switched to the Universalist denomination. I think like because he is more interested in just like learning about other worldviews and perspectives, which I think is a healthy thing to do, as long as you really like let the Holy Spirit lead you in truth, like in what real truth is, right? So anyways, so it was cool to talk to him and to see somebody who went through this journey of like being like, you know, in seminary in the deep Christian world to now like being in this place of more of a, I'm gonna like let myself ask questions and let myself see what other people have to say and their perspectives on things. So that was good. Then I went to sit down and I sat by this lady named Diane, who actually is apparently living with Aaron and his wife. And she was really, really cool. She said it was actually her first time at this church as well. And she also attends that Brew City Church. She said she's been going there like 20 years and went to Elmbrook for like 30 years before that. So very nice older woman. And she actually asked a lot about my life and like what brought me to this church. So I was able to tell her about the Celebrate Church tour. And I was able to tell her about how like I'm going to all these different churches in Waukesha. And I also told her about my previous missions experiences overseas. And she was asking me like, what was some of the stuff that you learned from those experiences? And I was able to tell her like how I did find it really valuable to like learn about other cultures and people groups, right? Because like before I ever went overseas, like I just kind of like saw Christianity through the lens of like what I knew, which was like I went to Lutheran church as a kid, and then I went to Assembly of God churches in high school. And like Assembly of God church was like the highest level of knowing Jesus that I ever experienced. But it was really just these like two like very specific sheltered church experiences that like were the whole lens by which I saw God, until like I went over the world, and then I saw like African worship, Japanese worship, like, French people worship, like, worship in all these different languages, all these different cultures, all these people groups, island worship in Hawaii and New Zealand, like, and yeah, just like the way that God's heart expresses itself in different peoples, in different cultures, in different ways. And he's so much bigger than just like the box that we put him in. And even now, there's still so many different expressions of people knowing God that I haven't seen. Hence partially why I'm doing the church tour, because like I can go to like all these different denominations and see how people experience God differently, even in my own city. And my own city is like only so small in the grand scheme of the entire world and all the different ways that people experience God. So there's like so much nuance to it and so much depth to it. And I was telling her like how when I traveled, that like opened my heart and mind to see like how much bigger the world is than like the bubble that I was born into right away. We were just like talking about the value of that. And then we also talked a lot about just like how like churches nowadays like struggle to have a place for like people my age and young adults, and that was a really powerful conversation too, just like talking about that more, because I think that's another thing that I've really gotten passionate about and realized recently is like it's really hard for single people in their 20s and 30s to make friends, like and to find good Christian community. So it was cool that she was also like, being able to have that conversation with me too. So that was cool. And I talked to one or two other people as well. But I think that for the most part, that's what I got from the Unitarian Universalist Church to say. So overall, like I would say it's not a church. That's what I would say. I would say I don't really consider the Universalist Church to be a church, because it's not about God. It's about people. But as a place for people to come together and to care for each other, even if they have different beliefs, I think that I would say it does well. And I think that, for people that don't know what they believe and they want to hear different perspectives and they want to give themselves a chance to explore what could be out there, I think this is a good environment for someone like that to enter into. And even like when I was talking to that Diane lady, like she attends like Bruce City Church in Milwaukee, so she attends like a different kind of church, versus like this church, Universalist Church, is more of like a questioning environment, I would say, more than it's an actual church where we worship God together. It's more just like a place where we figure things out together, and we or not even together, we figure things out separately, and we like encourage each other in their own separate journeys of figuring things out. So it's very interesting. But yeah, that's my Universalist Church perspective. I know this was not as celebratory as my normal videos, because normally I try to be very positive. But I do need to be honest too, like in the sense that this isn't a church that I can celebrate in the same way I can celebrate churches that are proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God. And so yeah, the lack of that is disappointing, but there's still good things to be found. Like I could even go, really, like if I wanted to, I could go to like a Buddhist temple, or I could go to like a Muslim mosque, or I could go to like a wherever Jewish people meet. And like I could find good things in all of them to celebrate, right? But ultimately I can't celebrate them the same way I can celebrate a place that's putting Jesus on his throne. So yeah. So this was the Unitarian Universalist Church, number 29 out of 60. So next week we'll come back with another church and we'll be halfway done. We're halfway done with the journey. I'm excited, guys. And another thing that was cool today is like, one of the ladies, when I was telling her I was about still going to all these different churches, like she was asking me like, have you found any that you're thinking of like plugging into afterwards, or you wish you could go to again? And I was like, yes, there've been a lot of them that I've been like that with, but like, I want to stay faithful to the journey the Lord has put me on to go and visit all of these churches. So I'm just kind of like keeping that in the back of my mind of like, next year, a lot of possibilities. in terms of places I could go and serve, or I could be more deeply immersed, potentially. So we'll see what the Lord has in store. I'm excited to continue the journey and to keep seeing him move throughout my city. So it should be good. I cannot wait to see what he has in store, guys. So thanks for tuning in. And until next time, stay in awe and wonder.